Hey, good evening. Welcome to another round of Pup Theology. I am Pastor Gavin. Tonight we have part 2 of our Badass Women of San Antonio series where women interview women, and they have a great conversation and panel about birth and reproductive justice. And we're so glad you are here. Remember, you can watch all of our past videos online on Pup Theology's Facebook page, Pup Theology San Antonio, and you can go back and look at all of our live videos since we've started meeting online. We usually meet at the Friendly Spot, and we want to honor them today again for always being a grateful host for so many years, and we hope to be back with the Friendly Spot Ice House sometime soon, but until then, you can watch our videos here live on Facebook and YouTube. Remember to share this video. If you're watching, share this with your friends and family on various social media pages, and we can spread the word about what we're happening and just all the dialogues that were taking place. Pup Theology is a group where we talk about faith, or we talk about our community, or we talk about creating the common good. All discussions we have are open and honest, and all perspectives are welcome here at Pup Theology, especially tonight when we interview some amazing women, some badass women of San Antonio. And tonight I have 2 hosts with us that will be taking over this program. First, we have Bekah McNeel. She is our normal co-host for Pup Theology. She is, again, a reporter for Christianity Today magazine covering immigration, but also an education reporter for 74 Million, an educational website. And we have Erika Stiner. She is the director of children's ministry at Travis Park Church. She also helps plan worship and do all these other things for Travis Park Church all the time. She works harder than anybody else at Travis Park, and she's our second time hosting Pup Theology. She hosted Pup Theology a few weeks ago when we had Simranjeet Singh, a children's author and also Sikh theologian, come and share. You can watch that video. Also, welcome, guys. How are you?
Doing well. Doing really good.
Good. Well, I am so glad you're going to be discussing this tonight. We have an amazing panel of some great doctors and doulas and midwives, and a great conversation of something I know little about, but Erika knows a lot about. And I'm so happy to have these types of conversations, because at Pup Theology, we want to be diverse as possible and have as many conversations that affect our community. And this was honestly Erika's idea a few weeks ago, and we're so excited to do it. And thank you, Erika, for contributing and being a part of. So tell us a little bit who you have on your panel, and I'll let you guys take over. Remember to share this and ask questions to this panel. So if you post on comments for Facebook or YouTube, if you're on Facebook right now, ask a question, and we'll include you into the programming. So Erika, tell us who you have.
All right. Well, first I'd like to introduce Dr. Erika Hernandez. She's a chiropractor and a birth doula. She specializes in working with growing families. As a mom of 4 with a diverse birth history, she uses her platform to empower families on their birth journey. She plays an important role in helping them connect with themselves and the birth community. Welcome, Dr. Erika.
Thank you.
And tell us who this little one is with you tonight.
This is my youngest. This is Cassia.
Welcome, Cassia.
Thank you.
We also have Adrianne Ortega. She is a reproductive acupuncturist and owns Alma Acupuncture. She specializes in women's health and fertility, pediatric, and mental health issues. She supports birthing people with fertility, pregnancy, and postpartum and wellness needs. She also supports people with their fertility issues, IVF, IUI, preparation, breech presentation, placenta, previa, postpartum depression, or anxiety, and other common issues during pregnancy and postpartum. She is the only female and bilingual fellow of ABORM, which is the American Board of Oriental Reproductive Medicine in San Antonio, as well as in the state of Texas. Welcome, Adrianne.
Hi, Erika. Thank you.
And then we also have Amanda Reyna joining us. She is the co-owner and managing partner of Journey to Motherhood, LLC, which is Doulas of San Antonio, a birth and postpartum doula collaborative in San Antonio, Texas. Her work includes providing evidence-based support for birthing people, including full-spectrum reproductive support, childbirth preparation and education, labor and postpartum care, and placenta encapsulation services. Amanda also writes for Alamo City Moms and serves on the storyboard of Texas Public Radio's Worth Repeating. Welcome, Amanda.
Hi, everybody.
glad y'all are all here tonight. Thanks for taking time out of your busy lives to be a part of this.
I'm so excited that this is in the Badass Women of San Antonio category. I really don't think there's anything more badass than creating or birthing humans. And I think that it's really exciting to hear from people who are fully embracing the badassery of it, and as opposed to making it the clinical medical procedure that we've really made it to be. So I'm super excited that y'all are here.
Thank you.
We're happy to be here.
Yes, likewise.
All right. So our title has to do with birth and reproductive justice. Can I ask you guys to define either of those, birth justice or reproductive justice?
I can jump in. So birth justice is one aspect of reproductive justice as a whole. Sister Song, which is an amazing organization that you can look up, has defined reproductive justice as having autonomy over all aspects of your reproductive care. So that includes birth, but it also includes how we identify in the world, all of our intersections, whether it's class, race, ethnicity, sexual identity, gender, all of these things. So when we talk about how can we affect birth, we also have to include all these different pieces. So that's such a very general definition, and there's a lot more to it. So I really encourage all of you to kind of look up Sister Song and see the wide of information that she's got available, or they have available, I should say, on their website on how different aspects of how each of us walk through this earth can affect birth and reproductive justice.
I'd love to hear, what Dr. Erika and Adrianne, if there's like an aspect of it that you feel like is most pertinent to your work.
Sure. It's hard to know who should go first on this platform. But as far as the work that we do, and then you mentioned, all of us focusing on this kind of side other than the medical side, which is the typical norm. It's about really making sure that people have this ability to make informed choices, to have informed consent in everything that they're doing. And I feel like something that I've been working toward here recently is, I feel like in the Hispanic community, giving them a voice, helping them to understand that maybe the medical side, although is the most common used practice, it's not the only way. And so helping them to understand that they have options and that they can, make other choices. They don't have to do what everybody in their past, everybody that they know does. And so that is something that is important to me when we're talking about birth justice.
Yes, I agree with Amanda and Dr. Erika. I see birth justice as in, like, we want all people in the whole family to be empowered during pregnancy, labor, childbirth, postpartum, so they can be able to make informed decisions for themselves and for their whole family. So I agree with Dr. Erika. Also, I feel, especially during this COVID time, I feel like it's really opened people's eyes to other options other than having a hospital birth, which I think is an important time in our society for numerous reasons, to be like, oh, it doesn't have to just be at our hospital. It can be at a birth center. It can be at my home. I can make it look different. So I feel like that is an important part. I agree with, Dr. Erika and Amanda. And then for me, as a acupuncturist, as a practitioner, I also really hone in on the reproductive justice part, meaning that, of course, there's all these intersectionalities. And I think it's been really interesting during this time that people are seeking out these different alternatives of, like, easing labor, of oh, I have a breech baby and I really don't want to have my baby at a hospital at this time. I really want to stick to this new plan that I just created about 5 months ago. So that's where I, as a practitioner, have been able to help families navigate these different options that they didn't know that they had necessarily, 5-6 months ago.
A lot of what I hear y'all saying is that you treat the whole person or work with the whole person or the whole family as an individual with all of the things that makes them who they are, all of their things that they are afraid of, or their medical history or their trauma history or who they identify as, all of those things to cater your work to the individual person. I think that is important. That might be the foundation of reproductive justice, is seeing each individual as who they are. How do we do at this in San Antonio? If you were to say on a scale of 1 to 10, what are things that we're really good at? Where do we have to grow and to learn and to be better?
Go ahead.
Because there's always an alcohol drink involved, but so San Antonio is really a microcosm of how the country is doing. And even in that, we're kind of a unique subset because of our proximity to the border and all the Latinx identities that come with that. We also have such a mixed community financially. So that also has an impact on how birth is viewed in San Antonio. We also have deep cultural, religious roots, and that also has a big impact, and that's very different than a lot of the country. So when you take all of those pieces and put them together, as a whole, I think we can all agree we could do better. And we heard already said that education makes a big difference. So when we're educating ourselves on how our bodies work and what our bodies can do, and being supported by our medical care providers, that can make a huge difference. What we also see and hear from people is that we're not heard when we go and talk to our medical providers. And that could be an end aspect, right? So if we're saying, I have concerns about my birth experience in this facility for these reasons, consistently, and I don't think this is symptomatic of just San Antonio, but oftentimes the education comes in from the medical provider who's like, oh, well, I'm just going to do these things because I know these things. And we don't hear the part about, well, my body does these other things. So how do we marry that together? This great pause, pandemic times, has given a lot of people that opportunity to explore other options. So that's what a lot of us are seeing in the background of people asking those questions. And how do I voice my concerns in the hospital facility when this is my only place that I can afford to birth? So that's the other aspect of it too. I have more to say, but I want to open it up so that my colleagues can also jump in on this.
Yeah, to reiterate what Amanda is saying, you can't separate one piece from the pie. And so with a person, as far as reaching people where they're at, meeting people where they're at, we of course have these different components to ourselves. We are physical, we are chemical, we are emotional. And so those pieces cannot be separated. But when you look at, say, the demographic of San Antonio, and when you look at the different areas of class, whether they are coming from a low income area versus a high income area, all of those different parts are going to affect it. So yes, we have the educational component, and depending on where you live, your education is going to be different. What information are you going to get, from an early age about your body, knowing different parts of your body. So I used to pre-COVID, I used to do a coming of age class with one of our midwives here in San Antonio teaching preteens about their body. And so in my home, it's pretty normal, to talk about vulvas or penises or whatever it may be, but that's not the same across the board. Everybody doesn't do this. And so with this class, our goal was to give these young minds some power, empowering them about their bodies, teaching them at an early age, just, anatomical names. And then allowing them to build from there, because the more information that we have, the more power that we have, and the more we are able to impact what happens to us, to our children. And so all of that is important, especially when we're talking about birth and about our future generations. So yes, the education, depending on where you live, that is being impacted. If you aren't getting that education, if you aren't knowing to ask questions about all of these things, then how can you? And so if you aren't able to make those choices that are going to empower you, if you're not able to make those choices that are going to empower you, then that ultimately is going to affect, your healthcare. And so I think that education is huge when we're talking about all of this. But again, it's just all woven in and it can't be separated.
Right. And I agree with Amanda and Dr. Erika. It can't be separated, that education and where they went to school, their access to healthcare, do they have insurance, can they pay out of pocket? A lot of my patients pay out of pocket. At least for my services, I do take a couple of insurances, so there is some coverage. And that is, most people don't have fantastic healthcare coverage in their insurance. Most insurance coverage does not cover acupuncture. So unfortunately, that definitely narrows down the patients that I get. However, I have patients that don't speak any English. And then I have patients that have PhDs. So, and I also have patients that prefer to speak Spanish to me, and that's great. And they are really educated. So I have a really, really vast population education-wise. So like Dr. Erika was saying, the education is a big deal. I feel like a lot of patients come see me because, I have a girlfriend that did fertility treatments. She had trouble getting pregnant and she's in California, and she told me I needed to find an acupuncturist. And she felt like that was what helped her. And so I found her website, and that's what happened. So there's different connections that people are able to make, and that lead them to a doula, that lead them to chiropractic care, that lead them to more integrative care with acupuncture, and just all of the spectrum that you can have to have a birth that you really want to be ideal for you and your family. So there's so many pieces that have to, or that can come together for an ideal and informed birth to take place.
So I'd love to know, we're talking about this as a justice issue, and I think Amanda brought up some of these places and intersections in our community where the injustice happens. And I think I'd like, because I'm assuming there's going to be some people watching who have not had their own birth experience. Hope that we're reaching a broad enough audience that there's people who are coming to learn about an experience that isn't something they've done. And I have 2 kids, as someone who has given birth twice, I can think of all the different places where advocacy and knowing my options and being able to say, I want this, not this, made a difference, a huge difference. But I would love to hear you guys, from your perspective, what are those specific points in the birth process that are where injustices typically occur, and where you find people being stripped of their power as birth givers, if you would?
How one presents in the world initially. So with full spectrum care, we're seeing people at all gender identities, all sexual, all spectrum of that, and also folks who have experienced loss or infertility or have terminated a pregnancy at any of those points. So that's already part of their history on a piece of paper. And that comes up. So during intake, a lot of times people are dead named or misgendered. People feel shame in having a loss or a termination, and talking about that as part of the reproductive experience and how that can impact them, because we can all attest here that if we're holding on to something emotionally, right? So holding something in affects your birthing experience, and that creates potentially a physical and emotional trauma and carries into postpartum. So whatever experience you're seeing can be affected by the people who are giving that care. So those biases, whether it's a racial bias or an economic bias or their own personal experience in birth, how that is projected onto someone, can really have a huge impact. And that is really what I think one of the ways it can create that cascade of injustice and experience in healthcare. And you also have the history of how Black women are treated in obstetrical care. Like historically, obstetric care is rooted in the traumatic experiences of Black women for the sake of education. So that in itself already, as a Black person who goes to birth, they have all of this already. So that's a lot to consider before you even walk into the room to have a baby.
Yes, so continuing with that conversation, if you do look at the numbers, Black, Brown, Indigenous people are 2 to 3 times more likely to die in that perinatal period. So whether that's during pregnancy, at birth, or in the postpartum period. And so Black women being the higher range there. Hispanics are actually on the lower end of that. But really, it shouldn't be happening anywhere across the board. And so when in my own practice, I actually have been seeing a lot more Black women coming in and really empowering themselves and looking at, again, this full spectrum of care. I feel like numbers have definitely changed. I've seen, at least in my office. And I think that COVID had a lot to do with that, of, pushing people, or people, not necessarily pushing people, but people branching out of the hospital, looking for alternatives because they didn't want to be, in a place full of sick people, and finding other alternatives for their birth experience. And so along with that, because we're blessed to have Nikki Brown in our birth community. And so she has gotten a lot of, she has made some waves, I feel, this year. And she has done a huge part on educating people and just letting them know about all of the options they have and giving them quality health care. And so that pebble that was thrown in has definitely sent ripples. And I feel like I have seen some of that. Whereas maybe, starting out with my practice a few years ago, it was predominantly white women that are coming and getting, this, what shouldn't be luxury care of feeling good, which is what most people would associate chiropractic with, but of keeping their bodies healthy and strong so that they can have a birth, with an outcome that they are not just happy with, but are, living healthily after. And so there shouldn't be this disparity, but there is. And unfortunately, a lot of that happened in the hospital. But now with this going on, I feel like I hear a lot more stories, at least, of people having better outcomes, of having healthier pregnancies and better births.
Well, that's really good news. I'm glad to hear that, that there's healthier outcomes and better births. That's fantastic. I mean, if I can think of one, and it'll forever be ingrained in my mind, and only because it was relatively recently. It was only about 2.5 years ago. I had an African woman, Black, from Ghana. She'd been in the States, military, just a few years. She was 46, was doing IVF, and so she sought out an acupuncturist, and she found me. And so she wanted to have adjunctive treatments during her IVF cycle to prepare for her transfer. So she decided that she needed to go. She found a doctor that she really liked in Dallas. And when she had her transfer, because there was a slight language barrier, and I would say that her accent was a little bit stronger than I think just the general population is used to. I didn't have a problem understanding her. I do believe that there was a problem with maybe the staff and her physician. And so she was a little bit confused about which hormones to inject and what days. So what ended up happening with her first transfer, unfortunately, is that she didn't inject the progesterone at a specific time, at specific days, and it did not take. So there went about $20,000, and so she had to have another transfer done, unfortunately. And of course, that time she definitely knew what to do, but I definitely saw a big injustice occur, and I feel like it was probably for more than one reason. My best guess would be probably the color of her skin, her slightly language barrier, and people just seeing her as, not like a one percenter. Frankly, I think that's probably what happened. What else? I'm not really sure, but I definitely have that particular case ingrained in my mind. Luckily, she was able to have twins at 47 years old, which was amazing. But it's something that was disheartening to watch, because I feel like if someone just would have sat down with her and just explained to her, on Wednesday, you do this injection, you do this injection, or just to clarify. Sometimes people just need to hear something 2 or 3 times. I feel like, who knows? Maybe she wouldn't have had to do it twice and saved several $1,000s. So have I seen injustices? For sure. I could tell you more, but that's one that comes to the forefront because we're talking about the Black population, African-American population. So, yeah.
So Erika brought up Nikki Brown, who is the midwife at San Antonio nurse midwife, and she just opened a birth center. And we also have a question wondering about what a doula does. Can y'all tell us the difference between a midwife and a doula?
So a midwife does clinical care and does well women checkups and follows someone through an entire pregnancy, postpartum. As doulas, we are not licensed medically, so we don't do any of the medical procedures that you would receive from a care provider in that sense. So we provide more educational, physical, and emotional support during any aspect of the reproductive journey, whether that's through IVF and being a support person through that process, even adoption, surrogacy, pregnancy, We've supported folks through a pregnancy termination, through an abortion, because that is part of their reproductive journey. So while we're not doing the clinical stuff, we're doing all the other types of information filling and getting resources that people need to support what their choices are.
I feel like she answered that question pretty thoroughly. So
She is the doula, so
yes, not much more to say about that. We do have a pretty good amount of midwives in our area. We have several birth centers as well. So those are always options. We have another midwife in town who also focuses on functional gynecology. So not only surrounding birth, but taking care of women from a more functional point of view. So if you wanted the type, or you needed the type of care that you would get at a gynecologist, you could go see her and get some more thorough, more personalized care. Her name is Rachel Olson, and she's functional midwifery. But that is something else that I think is important for women. I shouldn't say women, but for people to know is that there are other options other than just going the medical route there as well. You can go get blood work and, different types of testing done, hormonal testing to see what is going on in your body. But it doesn't have to be surrounding birth, even though that's what we're here to talk about today.
I want to just read the first line of her comment out loud, because I feel like it is such a valuable shout out to the work you guys are doing, that it's great that you guys are looking out for us women in San Antonio. And I know that you guys look out for more than just women, people who identify as women. It's the whole family and people who are otherwise identified on this journey. But I think that the spirit of that is a feeling of there's someone looking out for people giving birth. And I mean, I came to the midwife, this realm of the birth experience out of the medical experience after a miscarriage, and seeing how that had gone in a medical setting, and how it wasn't, I don't say dehumanizing. There are more dehumanizing things that are being done to people than being kind of cattle called through a medical field or medical office. But the 5 minutes to talk about this thing that had just happened, and to take a look inside the jar and say, yep, that's, what you think it is, and chunk it, was definitely something that, when I compared that to my time with my midwife, where every single checkup was an hour long, they booked an hour for you. They sat there and waited for you to have questions. And in that and I'm pretty white and empowered on the scale of, people giving birth. I'm in the most privileged category. And still that feeling of welcome, because I think that in the expert realm, when you go into a medical realm, it's expert lay person, and you're expected to just take and receive that information. And then going into this more collaborative space where I was treated as someone who should be asking questions and should be getting the information she needs and should be having answers. It took me a while to kind of get used to that, to embracing that right. And so I'm curious about y'all's work with folks. Do you find you have to acclimate them to having that kind of power?
Absolutely. To speak to that first point, when you think about going to see the doctor, the second part that you think of is, how am I going to pay for it? So when insurance dictates and limits the scope of choice, that automatically affects how someone's going to be treated. Right, wrong, or indifferent, to them, the insurance, at the end of the day, they don't really see those people. They see the numbers, right? So we encourage people to shop around for a care provider. To that end, if midwifery is something that you can put the finances together for or can get a reimbursement, that is a phenomenal model of care that is offered. And I can speak for my colleagues because I know them to the point where we would all agree that this is the standard that everyone should be receiving. I am not surprised, and I'm sorry that you were treated that way during your miscarriage experience. It is a very common experience that you just described that we hear time and time again from people going into a clinician office. And when we hear from someone who's like, I was treated in this way, and they really took the time to talk with me and to give me information I didn't know I needed to ask for, that is very rare. And we all wish we would hear that more from people who would go see a doctor. And that is the standard that we see more in the midwifery model. And there's that hybrid in the middle too, where some midwives can operate in a hospital, but they also have to follow the guidelines and are overseen by obstetricians. At least in Texas, the rules are very stringent. So this is why if you have a home birth or a birth center birth and someone has to transfer care into a hospital, very rarely does that midwife also have practicing privilege in that facility. And maintaining that standard of care and the continuity of care for that person's experience can make a huge difference. And when we don't have that, it's another chipping away of that power that you thought you had when you walked in, and someone has dictated to you, no, you don't have this. So we advocate in the background, ask these questions. Have you had these conversations? Do you need some help putting this together? Would you like us to would you like us to come with you to an appointment just for our physical presence, just to kind of help guide you in this conversation? And then as folks who support people in birthing spaces, we don't have the legal authority to make a choice or decision for someone, but we can certainly speak up and we can certainly slow things down for a second when too much information is being provided, so that the birthing person has the space and the capacity to make those choices for themselves. But I mean, I got into this work because I didn't know what I didn't know until it was already happening. And at that point, I was like, well, they're the ones that know the things that need to be known, so I'm just going to trust them. But that isn't how this should be. We should, the same way we research buying a fridge or a car or a house or anything that we're going to spend a lot of money on that affects us every day, that's the same way we need to take the time to look into our care provider. And just because your mom and your cousin and your sister went to this one doctor doesn't mean that one doctor is the best doctor for you.
I think that's so great. I think that's such good advice, because we tend to think like, well, I mean, my first gynecologist appointment was with my mom's gynecologist, and I just remember being like, well, I'll be avoiding that as much as I can for the rest of the
I don't want none of that. None of that for me, please.
No, thank you. Whereas like after my midwives, I was like, can we just hang out? Do y'all want to look at my vagina anymore? Because I would love to just stay here.
When I brought the cookies, like I brought these cookies because I love you so much. Like,
yeah. I think we've got some more questions.
There's a question from Timothy. How have y'all been able to serve the trans community? And then there's a second part to that. What kinds of different practices and things can we do to make it easier for everyone to have access?
Yes, we have worked with folks in the trans community. We've also, I'm going to speak for myself in this experience, where I was very transparent in saying that I was in the process of learning to change the language that I use. And, I'm working through this. Please point it out to me if I say or do something out of line, and I'm trying to get to where I need to be so that I don't cause harm in this situation. So that helped me in this process, and that was a while ago. And the first thing we can do is reframe how we view birth, that it's not just straight women who birth. And when we start changing that language, it's not taking away from straight white women who do birth, but it's including everyone else who can birth and is choosing to. as providers, I was very fortunate to meet in medical practice who trained their entire staff in preparation for providing care for a trans dad here in San Antonio. And like, that is amazing. So, and the nursing care, everything, everybody used correct pronouns, everybody used correct first names. And that's a big difference. And making someone feel safe, number one, that's one of the things that we really focus on as birth workers, all of us, in whatever aspect of the journey that we support someone, is making them feel safe. And when we understand what that means for other people, that's a step in the right direction. And there are lots of amazing resources through the Pride Center, through specific medical community providers who are working to create more gender inclusive language and practices that you can do to train yourself and your staff and your friends and your family and all of these folks as you're going through this process. There's so many wonderful resources on Instagram too for people who are talking about their own journey as a trans parent. And that's a great place to start too, even as a provider, to understand that unique journey, because each one is also as unique as ours.
That's all fabulous and awesome. Thank you. So I had the opportunity, I had a trans patient that needed help finding a practitioner to be able to do IVF with. This patient had gone to an IVF practitioner, reproductive endocrinologist, and was like, no, I do not practice with that population. So that was how I was able to actually help the trans community, was to help the family find a practitioner that was best for their family. So that was my basic big introduction to helping that family be able to have a child. So that was a really, really eye-opening, disheartening, but also joyful experience that I was glad to be able to partake in.
So I also have had some experiences in caring for different members of the LGBTQ plus community. And so I feel my part in that is when people come in to receive care from me, is that I am there holding space for them, no matter who they are, listening to their story, and meeting them where they are so that I can best serve them. And so whether that means that they're coming in for wellness care or coming in because they are on a journey to becoming a parent, and to adding to their family, helping their family grow, then my job there is to serve them, and to, again, make sure that I am, which something that I'm always working on is trying to change my natural form of communication to include as many as I can. And I will say I am not perfect, so I do still make mistakes sometimes, but I'm definitely trying to change the verbiage and make sure that I am including as many as I can.
I love that y'all have talked about this being something that is a cognitive change that a lot of us are having to make around this. And women have totally kind of staked out, cisgender, straight, married women have kind of staked out the, like, we get the glorious birth story. And for everyone else, it should be some level of trauma. And I think that to kind of disrupt that and celebrate life coming, life in the various ways that it comes about is really because there's just been such a huge industrial push to support, when you think about like the potential of IVF and what that has meant for so many people. That there's been a massive effort to make that happen for women for who we feel like should be giving birth, but then to like expand that energy and that effort to inclusivity in birth is it shows how much energy we have to spend on this, and we just need to direct it. Gavin has a question for us. Oh, he's going to want us to read this whole thing. No. Gavin says, as a pastor, I am always trying to educate my congregation about topics that affect our community. You all mentioned the challenges with some places of faith. How can places of faith do a better job interacting with birth justice and offer educational experiences or training? Where have we caused damage, and how can we correct it? Don't be shy, ladies. Jump in. He asked, so door's open.
It's a lot. It's a big question.
Erica, I think Erika with a K could probably weigh in on this as well, as someone who works in the faith space.
So I was waiting to see if you were going to say anything. But so I was raised in the church. And so I had a it was very heavy. I don't even know what words to use. But in that I was in, I don't want to throw names out, but I was in Assemblies of God environment. And so it was very big on shame, very big on not, I don't know, on keeping things, secretive and not talking about things. And so I feel like for our young people, it's not teaching them to shame. And I mean, I know in the church, there's only so much that you can do, but helping to open eyes to having education not be taboo, not making words and, the way that we carry ourselves and the interactions that we have with people being taboo. And so, I mean, I have a lot of personal stories where things affected me definitely, or even how that shame was brought into my marriage by me, because that's how I was raised, and those were the things that I was taught and things that were ingrained. And so learning to love myself and realize that, I still do church, and I still consider myself like a child of God, but because I have sexual interactions or, do any of these things, that doesn't make me a bad person. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like that birth justice has to include for those maybe who have been, who have made the choice to have an abortion, or who have made the choice to have sex outside of a marriage, something official, that it's not the end of the world. And I think that shouldn't be burned, for doing those things.
The biggest damage that the church has done, and speaking also from an evangelical background, is purity culture and the shame, the not having a conversation about it. Bekah mentioned that she went to her mom's gynecologist the first time. My mom didn't ever connect me with a gynecologist. I was my friends in college were like, hey, you're 18. Maybe this is something that you need to be doing. So the fear around not fitting in to the narrative, the one man, one woman marriage narrative, it causes a lot of damage. And I think, want to give a shout out because I know Travis Park Church really well. I want to give a shout out to the youth group at Travis Park. They do inclusive sex ed as a part of their programming every year. And that is not the norm in a church setting. So I know that there are churches out there that are trying to make up for it. And not every church has the shaming purity culture, but that's a lot of people's experience. And so with birth justice, with birth work, with reproductive justice, you know, helping people work through that trauma, that religious trauma, is, I'm sure, a very large part of, particularly with younger first-time parents. I mean, it's, or I don't even know, but I think that's got to be a big portion of it. What you are taught or not taught, what you are told is unacceptable, or, you know, completely what's shrouded in mystery because no one's willing to talk about it. That's damaging.
For sure. It is really damaging. If you can't talk about something, how are you going to bring it to the light, right? And how are you supposed to learn more about it? Yeah, so I was raised really in a Catholic family. So, I mean, I didn't even, you know, I didn't get a legit talk about my period. I kind of got a talk, but I feel like there should have been way more. I should have known, you know, when I was in middle school than when I learned in my college years when I was 21, when I was just like devouring all these books and learning about my body. And I feel like if we are able to empower young people at a younger age and for them to learn about how do we reproduce, and why are these fluctuations going on hormonally? And that's all normal. And these urges, and those are all normal also, that, you know, there'll be less of that shame that will go on. So yeah, I definitely was, you know, you don't talk about your period. Don't talk about your period. That's awful. That's dirty, whatever it is. Yeah, I definitely grew up with that. And definitely my house is not like that. With my 7-year-old, it's like she's yelled out labia in the, you know, in the before times, in the middle Target, you know, it's just different. It's different. And yeah, I want different for our whole community, not just my family.
And I would add to that, creating safe dialogue amongst the community. So I'm a fallen Catholic. That's border Texas life for you. And a lot of what we have to break free from is the dictates of what you should or should not do based on a mandate. And the variations of that mandate come through in different faiths, whether it is this is a hard and fast rule, or no, we're all a community. So when you create that sense of a community where everyone is safe to be who they are and have a space to talk about what that is, and things are normalized, like sex for pleasure. A lot of us didn't hear about that till we were well into our adulthood. And inclusive sex ed is huge. And even in Texas, we have to fight tooth and nail just for the State Board of Education to give us time on their agenda to talk about it. So when we in our communities, whether that's a faith community or a friends and family community, when we are comfortable to talk about it and create that opening for someone else who may have questions to talk about it safely, that can change the direction of so many things. We know that that can save lives. We know that people are more likely to demand different levels of care when they need it, and that they have a community behind them supporting them through this process. And I think we all mentioned shame, and we all mentioned the stigma associated with whatever choice we've made in our lives. And I would also flip that to say that how many men or people who identify as men can say the same thing. How many times have you heard a guy say, I had so much stigma associated with sex? You don't. We're the ones who whisper to each other. We're the ones that were curious about our bodies, and we're the ones that were misinformed when we were young. So when we turn that around, that could have such amazing repercussions, and we have to be loud about it. That's the thing. And when we're loud about it, people get uncomfortable. And we have to be able to sit with that level of discomfort in order for us to move through it. Just like with birth, right?
Let it roll over you.
You're going to get, the only way out is through.
One of the things you brought up there is, I mean, this is the shame and stigma around sex in particular or something, but then there's also just the submissive, and I think this is a tenet of white supremacy culture that the church has really grasped onto and embodied, but which is just the perfectionism and the obedient, like following the rules, don't push back. And I mentioned that, like, my experience with feeling like I shouldn't question the expert in the room, and just that feeling that you can say, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do that. I'll tell another personal story from my second child's birth was very eventful. And in the middle of it, I felt like I needed to change it up. I said, this isn't working. I need something different. And it required, because I was in a hospital, it was with a midwife who could operate in the hospital. And it did require the switching of rooms, blah, 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 blah. And my instinct was to not cause trouble. And I very much relate that to being a woman who was raised and enculturated as a woman in a hierarchical organization that was the church, and was just raised to not cause trouble. And I felt like apologizing for causing people this inconvenience of needing to help me out a little. And like, could you maybe move the ball over here instead of over there? I thought I wanted to do this, but now I want to. And I think that, again, it's that whether our faith is designed to make us free and empowered, or is our faith being used to keep us submissive and quiet? And I think that the hope for a lot of people of faith is that faith becomes, from it you can draw a sense of being beloved and accepted, so that you are the kind of person who has the right to ask if they can, or to the right to demand or say, this is how I want to go through this incredibly important process, and this is what's important to me. And maybe push back on some of that. So I want to go to another question. Melanie says, as a doula, fellow doula, I get this question a lot, and I'd love to see your response. What types of injustices are done in hospital settings? Also, what can be done if it's happened to you?
Everything and anything. I think all of it, like, we're all shaking our heads, like, you name it, we've seen it. And just when you think you've seen it all, you keep seeing more. I think the more consistent injustice that happens is not getting consent for an intervention or a procedure. Anything that occurs within the scope of a medical practitioner, it requires consent. And even if it's an emergency, which is why you fill out 900 pieces of paper when you're checking into the hospital. And oftentimes, to your point, Bekah, we trust the expert. So when something's phrased on, hey, can you do this for me? Or can I check? I'd like to check you and see how you're doing. Or I'd like to do this, insert whatever medical procedure here. And when we're in that birthing space, when we're so concentrating on what we're doing, sometimes we're not listening to that, so that other people in the room are there to support us. And there's different ways to handle this. I mean, I can remember one instance where someone who was birthing stopped everything that was going on to change the course of their care because the provider was not listening to them, and they felt that they were being caused harm, and they were being caused harm, and it happened so quickly. And she was able to just stop everything. But not everyone has the wherewithal in that moment. And not everyone, to your point either, is comfortable in saying, in causing a ruckus. I don't want to cause a fuss. So preparing people too, again, going back to that, you're paying for this. This is something that you are in charge of. You can control this. You have the options for this. And every medical practitioner, whether it's a home birth or a birth center or a doctor, an OB, there is a compliance process. And in those immediate moments, you can certainly get rid of that person. And you can certainly ask for the charge nurse. If the charge nurse is the one with an issue, we just keep asking for the person who needs to be asked for. We go, what's the 2020 meme? We go all Karen on them and start asking for a manager until someone gets there and deals with it. And then there's a legal process involved too. So there's a lot of things in place that again goes back to, we don't know that we can utilize these things when harm has happened.
I would like to add that, like, after the harm has occurred, sometimes in the moment it's hard to stop the, we talk about cascade of interventions. If you are processing a traumatic birth, there are people, I'm thinking specifically of Birthing from Within in San Antonio, does birth story listening, and there are ways to process the trauma after this has happened in order to work through it, and hopefully the next time you'll be more empowered. But there.
Right. So yeah, Nikki Shahid, Birthing from Within San Antonio, does a phenomenal job. And a lot of insurance also covers mental health support, right? So postpartum, so that's another thing. Postpartum mental health isn't necessarily covered through an extension of our insurance. You get the 1 6-week visit, and if you have something wrong, we have to make sure we code it right so it's covered. And there's more mess. So the trauma just keeps piling on when you have an issue. And then if it's your provider, do you want to go see your provider in 6 weeks? And if all you keep thinking about is that negative experience. So like, there's just a whole, I don't know that we can do all this discussion in today's chat.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
Keep asking questions. These are amazing questions coming from our viewers. Did anybody else want to add to that? Sorry, just wanted to.
So I guess because I don't want to share anybody else's stories, my first experience with birth for myself actually was very traumatic for me. And so in this instance, I went from, a attempted home birth transferred to a hospital to having the doctor. It was a teaching hospital, unfortunately. And so the doctor on staff pushing me to get a cesarean section. And I had found my voice then, so I wasn't scared to speak up for myself. I wasn't scared to say no. And so I fought hard for a long time to not be pushed into the C-section. I knew, I was educated. I knew how to look at the monitors and read the monitors and know that my baby was okay, that I was okay. But was still met with intimidation and met with him bringing in, a large group, 8 or 9 residents coming in to, again, bully me and tell me that I didn't know what I was doing, that I was going to kill my baby. And, being broken then to have to go through this whole recovery afterwards, not just talking about the physical, but the emotional side of that. And I did work with Nikki Shahid. And so she is somebody that I refer to a lot because I have birthing people in their postpartum period come into me. And maybe they weren't getting care during their pregnancy, but they bring their baby afterwards because their baby has all of these things going on. And we're not necessarily told that, well, we do hear, the stress affects the baby. But how much it impacts the baby, how all of that is going to impact you in your healing journey and your journey if you want to have more children in the future. And that, people come in and say, oh, well, but all that matters is that I had a healthy baby. My baby is healthy and I'm okay. And so that's all that matters. And that's not all that matters. You matter, your story matters. And so I kind of feel like a broken record because I've said this so many times, but it's because it needs to be heard. And people need to know that it's not just about having, you and your baby being alive at the end of this. That's important too, but your journey to that destination is important. And so even though sometimes we, people do speak up for themselves, things still may not go the way you intended for them to go. And your healing journey matters just as much.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's shame associated too with not having the perfect Instagram experience. Whether if it was at home or not, whether it was a surgery, whether I'm the snapback, the physical snapback, like, oh, your body has to be back in place.
Mm-hmm.
You made a human in 9 months. Give yourself at least a year, because unless this is your job and you have a professional team, that's another unrealistic expectation that we've been given. And I think over the course of time, we've seen more talk of partner support, which can help. But I feel like we still need to do work on partner support in recognizing postpartum affects both parents, right? Because I like to tell people you're birthing yourself in this process as well. Yeah. It's a whole new identity, and it continues to shift, not just that first year, but once this human has opinions that are not yours, and you start pushing back, and through that process too, a lot of our birth experience can come back. A lot of those negative experiences that we had, because we start questioning, well, was it because of this? Was it because of this choice that I didn't make that affects how this is unfolding too? And we have so much more work to do in mental health overall, not to mention when you're a birthing parent and you're supporting a birthing parent, or even like generationally, when you see like a grandparent in the room and how they're processing their trauma. Like, think of the generation that birthed us and how traumatic just all of that was, and then so on backwards. Like, there's a lot of heavy stuff happening, and we need to open the space up in those trusted community, like a faith-based community. When you have those smaller groups, create those spaces. And we're working in the more secular space and having that dialogue and encouraging and inviting people to talk through those things. But you guys, if you have that community, we as the leaders or the faces of whatever community that we're in need to be the ones stepping up and saying, what do we need to address to make sure our community is okay? And if our community is not okay, and I'm not the one to do it, who can help me with this? And same with parenting. Like, if I don't know it, that's why everyone writes a book, right? We all have bookshelves, like all this stuff, because everyone has a different experience. But yeah. And going back to shame, there's shame too in asking questions. So maybe we each need to find that one person who does listen. And it's not a competition, because it's not a competition. Birth is not a competition.
And that's why you want to bring your midwife cookies and go back, because they listen to you and they help you process that stuff. And so having a care provider that listens is important.
Yeah.
I think it's just telling that every time women get together, I mean, at some point, birth stories come up. I was laughing I was taking a yoga class and no one else showed up. And so me and the yoga instructor just sat on our mats and told birth stories. And like, she's like, I guess it's time for Savasana now, lay down. That was it. But there's something healing and empowering. And I'm guessing that a lot of the folks who are listening to this even are just replaying those moments of their birth story that, when you think about it, I mean, historically, men went to war women went to birth and that's how people died. You know, as far as like how big and monumental and what a huge life event we're talking about. Not that birth should be dangerous or whatever, but historically speaking, it was a big deal. And it was a major thing to go through and a major like point in time. And I think that there is kind of a, when you over medical, you know, when you make it, or you over anesthetize the whole thing and try to make it clean, we lose some of the like what you just went through. And then that pressure to like, yeah, button those jeans, pop out here and let's do a cute newborn shoot with you and your ethereal, like, you wouldn't walk into, you know, Walter Reed to somebody who just had their leg blown off and be like, hey, could you just slide on some pants and stand here and look really happy because you're alive, and we'll talk about what you went through later. Like we understand that. And I think we've lost some of just what a big deal it is. And I should not equate war and childbirth. I'm just thinking of historically, the number of people who, like the number of women who used to die in childbirth, and how it was, it's not a small feat to grow someone and get them safely into the world for both you and them. And so the support is so important. So sorry, I feel like I kind of botched that analogy, and now I'm feeling very self-conscious about comparing it to war. It's not what I mean, but just about preserving the right to not be totally okay with everything that just happened.
Yeah. We're very much in this social media culture. Like, let me slap on a smile and make sure that the filters are right and everything's perfect. And I'm not going to tell you about all the other crap that had to go into it to get this.
Well, just look at the backlash that happened with Chrissy Teigen recently, where she was talking about miscarriage.
I was just going to bring that up. I was just going to bring it up.
She's on social media. I'm like, well, y'all are on social media taking picture of every plant you own.
Right. But we don't want to see the bad stuff. We just want to see the plants and the sunsets or whatever, the food.
Yeah.
And no one wants to talk about that. That's the only picture that she's going to be able to share on Instagram. Mm-hmm. There's not going to be the 6-month sticker.
Right.
There's not going to be the first steps.
Right.
There's not going to be the first day of kindergarten and pre-K. None of that is going to happen. And so that was their picture. Man, so if anyone wants to take a look at it, I posted that picture because I treat almost on a daily basis women that have had miscarriages. Okay. So it's a big deal in my office, right? So I posted it because it needs to be talked about. It just does. Mm-hmm. The shame needs to go away because it's 1 out of every 4. I think it's out of 1 out of every 3. 1 out of every 3, probably, statistically more close. Mm-hmm. And so I posted it, and it turned into basically a Facebook fight, a social media fight on my Facebook, because someone chimed in and was like, I think that should be private. Maybe for your family, you want it to be private, and that's fine. That's fine. But they felt compelled to share it. And I think it's more than fine. And I think, especially it being October, right? October being the month of pregnancy and infant loss, that's like the thing. So there were several layers on that. It was really maybe extra important for them to share that information. So it kind of blew up my social media that day when I shared that picture. And that happens. And
I think it was what she did was beautiful and brave, and you know, not everyone has that social media following to draw awareness to these things, but it's a part of so many people's birth stories is loss.
And it goes back to what we were talking about before, the shame and stigma. And we only want to talk about the good things, but then the bad things happen and we don't have the wherewithal or the coping mechanism to process them. And that causes more harm too. So go on with yourself and post the things that you need to post when it comes to processing grief, and celebrate your wins, and celebrate, you know, the hope that you have and you share. I mean, that is such an intimate moment. And as birth workers, we walk that line with people sometimes, and we witness so much, and you never want to walk in with thinking like, well, this could really turn out badly. But we all know that. We, as people who birth, know, statistically speaking, not every outcome is a positive outcome. However you define that, however you define outcome, whether it's to Dr. Erika's point of like the good birth, the perfect birth, and the shame of having things done to you because no one's listening.
Mm-hmm.
And the same goes for loss, the grief associated with it.
Yeah. And we're also just, I remember, just in a patriarchal society, it gets put on the woman to be fertile, to carry the baby successfully. People will talk about it like that. Oh, it's carried successfully to term, like you would have failed if it hadn't. And I think that a lot of that shame comes back to like, could my body do that? Could I give that? And like it just mounts up for the mom on like what I'm expected to give my children. And then I think this is a good time to bring in Melanie's comment because it gets into the next thing that nobody wants to talk about. Postpartum support and all of its many injustices. So Melanie says, what does postpartum support look like with the midwifery model of care and doula support?
Oh, Erika.
Very different. So, I mean, I've been on both sides. And so with my first experience, there was not much of anything. Like I said, I was transferred to a hospital. And so I honestly don't think that anybody really cared. But with that, y'all talked about it earlier as far as that 6-week appointment. Sometimes I hear from postpartum individuals saying, oh, well, I couldn't get in, so I'm going for my 8-week appointment or whatever it is. And really with a midwife, it's so much more personal. With a midwife, they come, or at least in my experience, they come at 2 days postpartum, or maybe even the day after if you needed to be seen sooner. They come to you. They're coming to, ask you, have you had a shower? Have you had something to eat? How can I help you? They're coming, they're looking at you, they're looking at the baby, they're seeing what's your mental state like? How are you doing since you delivered this human being? And so it's just so much more in depth, so much more personal. They care about you as a person. You have that connection with a human being. It's not just all clinical. Let me look at if you had a cesarean, let me look at your scar, let me, do whatever. It's more about you as a whole person.
And in the doula support role, we check in within 24 hours, phone or text. Again, the great pause means we usually follow folks in hospital to their postpartum room, but things are different right now. So we're checking with partners and birthing folks, and then we're checking daily. And we don't expect an immediate response until we can coordinate a visit at home. And we want to have eyeballs on the situation as the third party who can assist with anything that may not be addressed in the room. Because sometimes we do see things that people don't, or we hear things just in the conversation, and then provide resources and references. Again, a lot of stuff is out of our scope, right? Because mental health assessments, and not all of us are lactation experts and all pelvic floor therapists. So we rely on each other as a group to use those resources as we see and identify it. Because many times folks don't even say to their doctor in their 6-week visit, oh, I struggled with latching. But 6 weeks is a long time to figure out how to feed a baby. Like 6 hours, and those 6 hours just, thinking about that support. So we improvise and assess along the way too. And we can also do continuity of care and provide postpartum services. Some doulas are strictly postpartum care doulas, so that's all they focus, whether it's overnight or during the daytime, depending on what the needs of the family are. But to Dr. Erika's comment, it's a lot of times it's like, hey, so why don't I do this so you can go take a nap? And I'm going to make you some snacks because it looks like you need some snacks. And or I'm on my way. I'm going to drive by XYZ restaurant. Can I pick something up for you? Because I'm stopping. So you're just kind of like, I'm making you eat. So postpartum care outside of the doctor world is very, very different when you're thinking about the team. And we often encourage folks to create a postpartum plan, not just a birth plan, even though we say preferences because things change, but your postpartum care plan is your support team. Who are your people? Who is going to be that one person checking on you all the time? Who's going to bring you food? Who's going to walk the dog? Who's going to clean your house? Who's going to do your laundry? Oh, I thought I would do that. No, stop. You don't need to. And midwives do that too. I mean, I've heard Nikki many a time say, you don't need to be sweeping floors, doing laundry. Call your mom.
Yeah. So my last question for y'all, and this has been such a great conversation. I'm sorry to start to close it out, but if I am just learning about this, what can I do to support the work that's going on towards reproductive justice in San Antonio? Are there people I should follow on social media? Are there organizations I should check out or donate money to? What should I do now? What should my follow-up be?
Well, you should follow us on social media. I feel like for sure. I think all of our social media, we talk about postpartum, birth, prenatal stuff. I mean, I feel like that'd be a really, really good place to start.
And there's a lot of fantastic hashtags out there too. So
yes.
Starting with reproductive justice. I mean, there's a lot of stuff. I mean, internet, right? So use your filter. There are a lot of people doing a lot of work in a lot of different places, and a lot of it can align with who we are here in San Antonio, and a lot of it can align with who we are as a citizen of this country. So explore. I think one of the jokes that we have in our house is GTS, Google that stuff, rather than just staying in Facebook. So internet, Twitter, Instagram, Google, there's so many different places. We would love to see more nonprofits here in town help here as well. My Google phone is talking to me because I woke it up. But to Adrianne's point, we're a good place to start. And if you don't see anything that on any of our profiles, you can just start digging around in other people's profiles and see what they're doing.
I think that the birth community in San Antonio often links to each other and shares lots of really great educational tools. So, do any of y'all have any closing remarks? One last thing that you want to make sure is said? There's so much that we could keep talking about all night.
Stay hydrated. We have a lot of work to do.
All right. Thank you so much. Be sure that you share and check out future events with Pub Theology, and we'll see y'all next time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a good night.
Good night.
Good night.